Welcome to the Thriving Farmers Podcast, where our mission is to inspire, educate, and celebrate sustainable farming. We believe that you can build a profitable and sustainable farm that gives you true farm freedom. Join us as we talk to farmers, innovators, educators, and entrepreneurs to glean their top takeaways in business and life. So today's podcast is going to be a little different. In it, we are interviewing Stewart, and she is talking to us about a SARE Fellowship that she took and traveled across the U.S. and visited a bunch of farms. And we're going to go over what she learned and the different farms she visited, that kind of stuff. So it will be a audio, but we will also have a video version of this podcast that will be available on the Thriving Farmer Podcast website. So make sure you do go check it out over there. There's some cool stuff that she's sharing, and I want to make sure that you get to see that as well. So Crystal, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Michael.
Yeah. So give us a little bit more background about, your job, how you got started, and what you currently do.
Yeah. So the reason I know you, in fact, is because I am an extension agent in New York State. I'm actually a regional specialist focusing on organic vegetable production. And my team works in 18 counties in eastern New York, from the Canadian border down to the Black Dirt in Orange County, and over from the Vermont border, 3 counties west. So it's a pretty big region, which includes Washington County, former stomping grounds. And I have been doing this job in New York for the last 12 years, which is great. It's actually my dream job because I get to balance a mix of doing research on vegetable production in the field, working with awesome farmers, teaching in the winter and doing field days, and then doing on-farm consultation work. So problem solving along with farmers, which I find to be an awesome mix. Before I did this, I actually worked in South Dakota, which was really interesting and really different, working on ornamental horticulture. And I did all of my horticulture schooling at the University of Wisconsin in Madison before coming originally from California. So I've been all over the place. The SARE Fellowship was a nice return to being all over the country because I've been all over the country.
So tell us a little bit more about how that SARE Fellowship is set up and kind of what the steps are in that.
Yeah, it's an application process, and 4 different extension people from across the country, one from each SARE region, are selected each year to participate in a 2-year fellowship. And they try to balance the project in many different ways. So we've got the 4 regions represented, but then we also generally have 2 men and 2 women represented within the program in each cohort. And each of the 4 of us have a different discipline. So in my cohort, we had a vegetable specialist, a greenhouse specialist, a forage and livestock specialist, and an ag economist. And the idea is that you go through these 2 years going to 4 different regions, to the 4 SARE regions. And the goals are really twofold. So we're trying to both understand agriculture in these different regions and look at the challenges and opportunities within sustainable agriculture. But we're also working really intensively with one farm on each of these trips. Do either some problem solving or some opportunity unpacking as a group. So within the university systems, we've become more siloed over time with the idea of specialization. And the goal of this is to remember what we originally knew in extension, which is how to work together to solve problems that are broader than any one specialization. So within my fellowship group, we were always looking at the triple bottom line of social, economic, and environmental considerations. And having these 4 voices work together on that was incredibly powerful and has created a network of folks that I think is really doing a good job of holding this idea together and moving forward using these concepts in extension.
Very cool. So then it's a 2-year. Tell us about is there like you go to one area in 1 year and another area, or how is that split up?
Yes. For those of you that are looking at the podcast, I'm skipping through our variety trial work. We can come back to that. Basically, each year we go to 2 different locations. Pictures that people are seeing right now are of our trip to Idaho. And one of the interesting focuses in being in Idaho is that that's a huge seed production area. being from the Northeast, working with high mowing, the farmers that we were visiting while we were in Idaho are often selling to high mowing. So there's a direct relationship there.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So each location obviously has strengths and weaknesses. And for Idaho, the dry weather was both, of course. Being an arid vegetable production region is completely different from what we're doing in the Northeast.
Yeah. What are we seeing on the right side of that picture?
On the right-hand side, and actually I should say that the picture on the left is from Idaho. The picture on the right is actually from Texas.
Oh, cool.
The seed production was a huge theme throughout our fellowship. So what we're looking at on the right here is actually wildflower production in Texas. So if I scroll to the next picture here, this is one of the wildflower fields that we visited.
Oh, wow.
This is actually poppy production. We're looking at in this other picture, I think is probably grass seed production. It was so fascinating to see these different forms of agriculture that I had never conceived of. To think about how we could do something similar within our own region. You know, for me, looking at how we can do this in the Northeast has been incredibly interesting, and how vegetable farmers actually, diversify their operation by considering growing some sort of native seed. Is that economically viable for us too? That's been a fascinating question.
All right. You did seed production. What else were you looking at on the different farms?
Yeah. Well, for me, I think the seed production was one of the most fascinating things as a vegetable specialist, thinking about what else we can do in our region. But it was also really interesting to look at how the different regions were handling water management issues. You know, in the Northeast and parts of the Midwest, we're so fortunate because we don't think about water management the way that they've had to think about it out west. So what we're looking at in this picture that I'm showing is actually deep buried trickle irrigation. Because one of the weird contrasts that you see out west is that they both have a water shortage, and they also are doing a lot of flood irrigation. So if I pop up this picture, showing a fascinating picture which tells about the perils of agritourism, which could lead to death. And Idaho wants you to know that.
Yes.
So that sign is one of these interesting little reservoirs that they're using to move water all over the Treasure Valley, which is where we were in Idaho. So they're moving the snowpack out of the mountains through these reservoirs and canals into the fields through flood irrigation. And flood irrigation is not at all efficient. So taking some of the innovations that we're using in the Northeast and in small-scale vegetable farming and trying to apply those on a much larger scale to see if they can figure out how to put in semi-permanent trickle irrigation systems that they do cultivation over the top of. It's really interesting, the water management challenge.
Yeah. So I've been out through the West a few times now and actually worked with growers that have these issues. So the trickle, is that just using like regular drip tape, or are they using a heavy duty? I mean, how many years can they get away with keeping that same type of irrigation underneath the ground?
Yeah, in these systems, they're using a heavy duty drip tape, which magnitude's more expensive, but it's also supposed to last they're hoping to get 5 years out of it. Maybe they can get more. It's a question. This is a research trial that you're seeing in this picture because this is not a standard practice yet. So they're really still trying to figure out exactly how to make this work efficiently and effectively for these growers, especially with field crops. I mean, what we're seeing here is a picture of, I think it's rye. And, thinking about moving from pivot irrigation, which is the other system that they're using out there, to doing trickle, is a huge savings of water for these fairly low value crops compared to vegetable production. So they have to have the economics nailed down before they can start doing this commercially.
Absolutely. All right. What else do you want to show us?
Yeah, let's scroll through. It's so interesting to move into some of these other areas and look at the definitions of sustainability. So this is actually a picture from Texas again.
Okay.
Being here is an interesting trellising system and then tunnel production system for growing peaches in Texas. And Texas is obviously a lot warmer than we are. So we were a little confused at first, but then you realize that this is not only for cold protection, but this is also for the extreme weather events that all of us see more of. So this can serve as hail protection, frost protection at times when you absolutely can't afford to have frost. So we're seeing a lot more movement in the directions of needing to protect all of our crops all of the time. And that was a theme across the nation. One of the other interesting things that we looked at, which I haven't really thought too much about, was grain production within the areas that do the best job of it. You know, in New York, we're trying to scale up our grain production, and we're facing a lot of problems because growing grain in wet climates is, of course, very challenging, and we're very scale challenged because our fields just aren't that big. So going to North Dakota and being able to see what grain production looks like and what their version of sustainability and grain production looks like was really, really interesting. So right here, we're at the North Dakota mill, which is actually the only state-owned mill that's left. The state of North Dakota still owns this. And they're running both organic and conventional grain on different sides of the mill. It's incredibly modern, incredibly efficient. And some of the highest quality milled grain in the country is moving through this mill into New York City and other high-end markets that really need to have flour that's at really specific milling specifications. I know nothing about any of that. Understanding that there are folks that are devoting their lives to this and seeing what that looks like was incredibly interesting.
Interesting. So was it more common at one point for more states to own their own mills?
Well, I mean, I think that there were more state-owned mills.
Okay.
More of what it was. You know, the Dakotas have always been, you know, our breadbasket because of they have perfect weather for grain production. So there were more mills, and this one has continued to grow in size and scale up in its capacity, while other smaller mills have gone by the wayside.
Gotcha. Now, with the aspects of grain in the Hudson Valley, do you still think that's a viable thing, and are we still working on growing that, or do you think that it's going to max out at a certain size?
Well, the economic drivers behind it are allowing it to be viable.
Okay.
Certainly, if we were only talking about commodity grain production, the Hudson Valley could not be sustainable because we're talking about artisanal grain production and we're talking about using it in microbreweries and in specialty baking, certainly there's still room for that. And folks are really interested in having that local food shed. So because of that investment, we still see grain farmers making a go of it. It's challenging. Same thing with other aspects of the brewery operations. You know, we're not the right climate to grow hops easily either. But because there's that interest in doing it, we can afford the higher inputs in order to make it successful.
Interesting.
Yeah, it is. And it's so fascinating to think about what it means to be sustainable. You know, does it mean sourcing everything locally, or does it mean using the rail system to efficiently move grain from areas where it's really much easier to produce it? That's a question that I don't think any of us have an answer to, but it was really good to meet these folks face to face, see what they're doing, and think about what our food system really is. So I mentioned earlier that one of my favorite parts of doing this fellowship was that we were able to work really intensively with specific farmers. Just wanted to talk a little bit about that because I think that if farmers ever have an opportunity to have a group of either extension people or other farmers go through the process of working out their triple bottom line with them, I find it to be one of the most helpful things that you can do with a farmer. And it certainly has influenced how I think about my work with farmers. So every time we went to a different location, we went through this process of what we call reading the farm. We would work with the local extension educator to learn about a specific farm and really try to understand why it is that farm is in operation. You know, what is the purpose of the farm? Because every purpose is so different. And if we don't understand that first, then we can't give good advice. And I think that was one of our foundational lessons in all of this is that, you know, I as a production specialist can certainly tell you how to scale up and grow more carrots more efficiently, but that might be damaging to your quality of life. And if I don't know what your goals are as a farmer, then I can't give you the answer that makes the most sense for you. I might be an answer that makes more sense for me. So that was a really important lesson for us. And the picture that I'm showing here is a longhorn cattle cross from a farm that we worked with in Texas. And this farm was fascinating because, you know, these folks are trying to change what sustainability means in Texas. You know, they're trying to do a better job of management intensive grazing. They're moving into organic meat bird production. And they're facing a lot of resistance as a multi-generational farm that never did things this way, as a farm that's trying to reduce the stocking density of livestock, and as a farm that has brought in another half that didn't grow up in farming and doesn't have that background and the tension of all of that. It was really great to be able to go out and spend 2 days with these folks and understand, how important it was for them to integrate the whole family into the operation and what that would look like, and to ask questions about, what does succession look like for you? Where are you going? I think that was another huge piece that came up over and over again was, you have an exit plan, and you have an exit plan from the start.
How big was the farm?
Oh, this particular farm was about 2,000 acres, which is tiny.
Mm-hmm. In the scheme of things in Texas.
Yeah, I know. And Michael, that was one of the funniest things was, for us in the Northeast, like 2,000 acres, that's bigger than the biggest farm I work with.
Yeah.
In Texas, they're nothing. They're just like this tiny little farm. North Dakota, we visited a ranch, which was 13,000 acres. And he felt real comfortable with that. And I said, yeah, that's, we've reached that right size. We're just big enough. Really, just big enough. Okay.
And how many thousand acres did you say?
13,000.
13,000 acres. And what were they growing? Was that all grain, or was that grain cattle?
That was mostly cattle. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, depending where you are in North Dakota, the drier parts. So the drier it gets, the bigger the ranches get. And that was west towards Wyoming. So the ranches got bigger and bigger.
Yeah, very interesting.
It is. It's absolutely fascinating to realize the effect that water has on everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they say the next war will be fought over water, and I absolutely believe that's going to be true.
Yeah, and the pressure is only mounting.
All right, so what else do you got for us?
Well, you have been curious about what the top 3 takeaways were.
Yes.
Tour. And I think that as an extension agent, one of the best reminders to me was that we all need to be doing the best job possible of maximizing our human capital. That forming connections is essential in this era, and it's really hard to do so. There's a lot of people who are experiencing a lot of scarcity right now. And it's really easy to retract and really just try to focus on making sure that you're okay. But we're all rising and falling together in agriculture. So, making connections with your neighbors, making connections with your extension agent, me as an extension agent, making connections across state lines in any way I can in order to support agriculture is really important. And for all of us to be keeping our eye on the bigger picture and asking ourselves, what can we do to help each other make this a sustainable operation moving forward into the future? How can we impact climate change? How can we support each other economically? How can we support consumers in understanding and being able to access our product? That was certainly really important everywhere that we went. The water question, as I've mentioned, is something that we absolutely cannot ignore. Between water and other forms of environmental degradation, looking at our pollinator habitats, the picture that we're looking at right now is of that 13,000 acre ranch in North Dakota. And you'll notice that he's standing in a planted cover crop in the middle of that ranch because they're very concerned about pollinator habitat. They simply don't have bees flying around in North Dakota these days. So, for all of us to be thinking about these bigger picture questions and realizing that if we're not, then we're not helping move ourselves towards where we need to be. I think that's really important. And I think the last thing is be curious, be interested in what's going on out there. And I tell you, it was really, really hard to step out of my job for 2 weeks a year. It was never at a convenient time. And it was always, it made us all feel swamped. But it was so valuable to be able to take the time during the growing season to experience what other people are up to. So if you can, even for a weekend, well, not a weekend, how about a Sunday, Monday, off the farm and visit somebody just to see another viewpoint. It's just so valuable.
Yeah, talk to me about that with the bees. They just don't have bees in North Dakota because of the die-off, or is the native habitat just gone away that much, or?
Combination of both, yeah. The bee die-off is affecting everybody across the country. Everywhere we went, there were concerns about making sure that you could move enough bees into the operation to get adequate pollination. But the other issue in places like North Dakota, where we have massive amounts of grain being grown and hedgerows have been removed, there's very little habitat for wild pollinators. So making sure that there are enough islands of pollinator habitat that wild pollinators can survive. Somewhat, standard monocropping that's happening is really, really important. And there's great resources like the Xerces Society if anybody wants to look up, how to do that on any given farm.
Gotcha. Yeah, I'm putting that down here as a resource. So tell us about kind of like the projects you're working on now. I know you're really into garlic. That's kind of like your thing.
I am. I'm disturbingly into garlic. This fellowship was all about unsiloing, but in my job, I'm pretty intensely focused on vegetable production. And I've been working on garlic as my primary research focus for about the last 8 years. It's been wonderful to be able to focus so intensely on a crop. Some of the growers that I work with tell me that it used to be a trouble-free crop until I came along. I tried to pretend like I didn't hear it.
Yes.
And what I always tell growers is that I'm trained to see the problems, and sometimes it's easier to just not see them.
Yes. So what are we looking at in this picture?
Yeah, so what we're seeing here is a field day that we held in the Hudson Valley. And a lot of what I've been doing in the last 2 years is a fusarium management trial. So what we're looking for, and fusarium is a disease that affects the basal plate of garlic. If you've ever pulled out garlic that doesn't look quite right and the whole base of it is kind of pinkish and the roots are all gone, that's fusarium. Or if you pull garlic out of storage and you've got those little sunken brown spots, that's also fusarium.
And the basal plate is where the cloves attach, correct?
Correct. And the roots come out of the garlic bulb. Yeah, exactly.
So in this trial here, and this is at what farm?
This one is actually at Roxbury Farm.
Okay.
The other picture that I was showing you before from the field day was at the Hudson Valley Farm Hub.
Gotcha. Okay. And so what has your research shown on this fusarium? I mean, I see you're using different color mulches and that kind of thing.
Yeah. And so the focuses here were twofold. So fusarium is an interesting disease in that it's basically everywhere all the time. And it affects hundreds of different crops. There are dozens of different fusaria species affecting pretty much everything. So with this disease, we're not trying to avoid it. We're not trying to keep it out of the field. And in this particular trial, we had two different focuses. And we did this in 4 sites across the state. So in one of the sets of trials, the biological controls that are available to see if any of those have an impact on fusarium levels. And what we're seeing in this picture, which is the one that I did more of the growing on, is cultural controls. So we wanted to see if using raised beds or different types of mulch would actually impact fusarium severity. So it's kind of hard to see because this was all mechanized trial installation. So whenever you're using a tractor, even flat beds are slightly raised. On the left-hand side here, we've got raised beds, which are at about 6 inches, maybe a little bit more. And on the right, we've got flat ground beds. And then within that, we tried using straw mulch. We used bare ground, white plastic, black plastic, and then we also looked at varietal differences. So if you're growing, for example, German white versus Spanish Roja, are there differences in susceptibility to this disease? And basically what we found out, which was a little bit confusing to us, was, and this is one of those fun things about doing research, is that we really want to fix it in 2 years, and then the universe tells us, like, that's really not very wise of you. You're not going to fix anything in 2 years. So what we found in the first 2 years is that it didn't really matter for fusarium severity whether or not you were using different mulches, aside from using bare ground, which did have slightly higher levels of fusarium.
Interesting.
Yeah, I found that very interesting as well. And I don't think we're prepared to explain that. We can just say that that's what happened. So there weren't any significant differences between the other plastic mulches. We did have more even growth when we grew garlic on white plastic. So we instantly had large bulbs, and they were evenly large. Whereas on the black plastic, we had some that were small and some that were gigantic. As a grower, I prefer having consistently large bulbs to having some that are small and some that are gigantic, and then I have to grade them. Anecdotally, I really like that white plastic if I'm going to use a plastic. And I think that the reason that might be so is because during the heat of the summer, garlic and all alliums can shut down if the soil temperature goes up over 90 degrees. So with white plastic, which is reflective, you're not going to run into that problem. So that's the theory on why that may be so. And similarly, we had pretty even growth under the straw mulch. But of course, with straw mulch, there's always that question of, is it heavy enough? Is it too heavy? And certainly we ran into that this last year, and you can see it a little bit in the picture on the left where we have a spotty stand in the center row there that we had really heavy snow cover last year on this field. And then we had pretty heavy snow cover or straw cover, and the garlic struggled to come through that. It eventually did, but it wasn't ideal. So there's still questions about exactly how to apply that straw to get complete weed control without actually hampering the garlic.
Talk to me about the variety difference. Was there any difference with the fusarium on different varieties?
There was, yeah. That was the most striking difference. We had significantly amounts of fusarium on the Spanish Roja, which is a Rocambole type with 8 to 11 cloves. And we aren't prepared to say that that's because the Rocamboles are more susceptible to fusarium. What seems to be more the case is that they prefer certain soil types, and those were not the soil types that we were growing on, or certain environments in general. Some growers theorize that those particular varieties do better at higher elevations. I have no idea if that's true, but there are growers who do better with certain varieties at higher elevations. So the take home for me isn't that you should grow porcelain varieties versus Spanish Roja. It's that you should trial a few varieties, and if something seems to be doing better for you, it probably is. So you should watch that. But you should take 3 years to allow the garlic to acclimate, because it's one of those crops that actually changes over time, not because genetics change, but because which genes are turning off and on changes over time. So you've got to allow that to happen.
So what you're saying is locally grown garlic or keeping your own strain can actually be good because it adapts more to your area?
Absolutely. Yeah. If you can buy from somebody local or you can grow your own, certainly that does help with yield, unless you have a problem with your garlic. Well, if you have very high virus load or you have bloat nematode or something like that, then it is better to go back and get another type of seed. And for some growers, it's just not worth it. If you don't have the infrastructure to dry your garlic properly and to store it well, then maybe buying it every year is actually the better option, just based on the rest of your systems. So get the whole picture there.
If you're looking to shave hours off your week and become a thriving farmer, you're going to want to head over to growingfarmers.com/free resources and download our free resource bundle. It contains ebooks on our profitable farm toolkit, increasing efficiency and safety in your wash and shed, winter growing techniques, and our 30 farms to follow on Instagram. Now, if you haven't already followed us, we're Growing Farmers on Instagram. That's our handle. So head on over there and follow us. But you can also go to growingfarmers.com/free resources and download our free resource bundle today, and it will help you shave hours off your week and become more of a thriving farmer. So a little bit more about the garlic. Is that something that allium leaf miner attacks?
Yes, it is. Actually, Columbia County, where this farm is right at the threshold of where allium leaf miner was last fall. And we suspect that it might have actually jumped a few more counties north and that we just haven't documented it yet. For folks that haven't experienced this pest yet, allium leaf miner is a little fly, and it lays its eggs twice a year. It goes through 2 generations, once in the spring, and then it goes dormant for most of the summer, and then it lays its eggs again in the fall. And it's actually leeks that we've seen the most problems on. Absolutely devastating to fall leek crops. Partially because the maggots are so present in leeks and so obvious, and partially because the pressure just seems really high because there are so few alliums available. In the spring, you've got garlic and onions and scallions and shallots and all sorts of wild onions. So there's a ton of things to eat, and in the fall, there's just leeks. Entire
Yeah.
population converges.
Yeah. So what are growers using to manage this organically?
Organically, there's two strategies that are proving moderately effective. And mind you, this is ongoing research because we're in year 2 of dealing with this pest. The foolproof way of dealing with this is to put on row cover. And quite a few growers have been doing this. So we're scouting emergence of this pest. And I wish I had a picture, but if you Google allium leaf miner and look for the oviposition marks, it's really different looking than anything else. You end up with these little white dots that are about the size of a pen tip up the leaf, normally towards the top. And there might be 5 to 20 of them in a row. So if you're seeing these marks, then it's slightly late to cover. But if your neighbors 30 miles to the south are seeing these marks, you want to get it's for a while. So if you're going to do this, you want to make sure that you actually do have some plastic down, because the weed control issues are pretty significant. So some of the growers that dealt with this last year for the first time, people are changing their planting systems to be on plastic during this first flight so that they can cover those spring crops and walk away from them for the month that you have to ensure that you don't end up with feeding damage.
So then plastic mulch with straw between, row covered, would probably be your best bet.
Just for that spring planting. There's also work being done on using entrust. So if you're interested in using entrust, right now it looks like 2 sprays, and the timing is still what we're working out, but 2 sprays during that flight has been enough to control to an acceptable level, which isn't 0, but close enough for economic thresholds. But that work was only in year 1 last year. There's another year of that research happening this year. So stay tuned. For larger scale onion growers, that's certainly going to be probably a necessity. If you're concerned and you want to take the foolproof route, I would definitely go with the row cover.
Yeah, because Orange County is a pretty large onion producing area, correct?
It is. It's hardly any organic. So, a lot of the work that's being done, the research that's being done, is being done in Ulster County, actually, because there are onion growers and garlic growers there that are easy enough to work with. Yeah.
Gotcha. Cool. Yeah, I remember when we were working, you guys were doing a melon trial, and I think you were measuring the bricks.
Yeah, that kind of trialing is ongoing.
Yes.
Yeah, we haven't done another melon trial. I don't think that I'll be able to taste that many melons again. Did we rope you into taste testing? I'm trying to remember. Or was it your sister?
It was my sister. Yeah, she had to go out. She had to collect them all. She actually, you left the refractometer, is it?
Yes.
And she went through them. But yeah, I mean, we got to the point where we were like, yeah, we've had so many melons. It really wasn't worth it anymore. No one wanted to eat melons.
No.
But it was really interesting to kind of see the colorations. And as the season progressed, as we lost leaves in the melons because of disease too, what the sweetness changed.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things that we've learned above all else is that if you can keep your plants healthy, the flavor profiles are completely different. During a stressful season, you can't really use those flavor profiles and bricks numbers as accurate.
Yeah. Do you remember what the top melon was that we liked out of that trial?
I don't. That was quite a while ago.
Yeah.
I'm still quite enamored with the goddess melons, to be honest with you. Yeah. And I also have enjoyed a little melon called Sarah's Choice.
Okay, because that's the variety that came to the top of my mind when you said melon trial. So I'm wondering if that must have been the one that did stand out for us.
Yeah, I certainly like the flavor of that one, but I don't remember if it performed well yield-wise. Always the question, right?
Yes. Yeah, because it doesn't matter if it tastes good. If you don't have enough of them to actually make the crop profitable, then that's a big challenge.
Exactly.
Yeah. So in this picture, it looks like we're seeing carrot trials and then lettuce trials.
Yeah. Yep. We've graduated on from melon trials. We'll go back to them someday when we're not traumatized anymore. In the last few years, I have been focusing pretty heavily on root crops, which was a lot of fun. And I was working with the Hudson Valley Farm Hub down in Hudson Valley, which was great because they have river bottom land. They don't know what a stone is. So that was fantastic for growing carrots and beets. So we did, and all of the trial data from these is actually published on our website, which I listed as a resource for you.
Awesome.
So if people want to see our carrot data, for example, we had a ton of carrot varieties. And unfortunately, in year one, we made an ordering error, and we ordered a carrot called Belgrado, which is a storage carrot, instead of ordering bolero. So we ended up with these monster carrots, which had absolutely nothing to do with the standard that we wanted to use to compare in year one. But in year two, we actually did have bolero in there. And year two was really dry of this trial. So if anybody wants to just have a sense of how our carrot trial went, year two was super stressful for the carrots. So to see what it looked like when we had some water stress for the crop.
Now, with that water stress, did you have any disease because it was so dry, or?
Yeah, I mean, that was what precipitated this trial, was trying to find alternaria-resistant varieties. And year one, we had lots of alternaria, so we were able to make some really clear distinctions. And we actually have pictures on the website if you want to see what the alternaria looked like. But year two, you're right, the alternaria pressure was lower. But there was still pressure. The thing about these river valleys is, regardless of how dry it is, we still managed to generate fog. So, you still have prime conditions for alternaria.
Now, I'm looking at the carrots grown here, and it's looking like this is a double ridge system. It's
actually a single ridge. Those are just monster tops. Yeah. Okay. So this is a single ridge system. Oh, gosh. How far apart were the ridges?
Probably 36.
I think they might have been 30. It's somewhat non-typical equipment. It's all hawk cultivation equipment that was being used here, so it's just a little bit different. But that was a very nice system. They stayed really clean within the system because being able to cultivate ridge sides is just phenomenal. So a little bit of weeding on the tops of the ridges until the canopy started to close. Almost no hand weeding was necessary.
Yeah, and so then with the ridge too, you have beautiful straight carrots.
Yes. Yeah, they were phenomenal. Here's a funny thing, though. So in year two on the ridge system, we didn't have rain for 4 weeks after I planted the carrots.
Wow.
Did not germinate. And then finally we got a light rain and they germinated, which I was surprised by. And then the next week we got 5 inches of rain. So all these little baby carrot seedlings got somewhat exposed on top of the ridge because the ridges were actually eroding. So our once very straight, beautiful carrots now had green tops and some very strange distortion and a lot more forking. So what else had disrupted them in that ridge during that rain event led to some really weird problems. So it's not a guarantee that things are going to go well. And if you're going to do ridges, you have to do some supplemental irrigation for germination. And that was the other thing we learned. Because we knew this soil was heavy enough that we would end up with some good wicking if we had nice firm ridges, but it didn't happen.
Yeah. So let's talk about, it looks like a lettuce trial on the right side of the picture, and I believe that's at Pleasant Valley Farm.
It is at Pleasant Valley Farm. Wow, good eye. Yeah.
I know those fields.
Yeah, your former farming neighbor.
Yes.
Yep. So we're actually moving to year 3 of lettuce trialing this year, and I'm moving it to my home farm this year for the obvious reason that you see in the picture that getting to a lettuce trial once a week is inadequate.
Yes.
We always had at least 1 or 2 varieties bolting in this trial. But what we're looking for within these trials specifically is heat-tolerant romaine types. We're trying to get through the peak of the season with some romaines. So we found a few nice mini heads that are coming through pretty nicely. We've been trying some of the California varieties, but mostly they're not adapted. It was just a shot to see if any of those were actually well adapted, but they're really adapted for coastal climates that we just don't have. And this year we're going to move into looking at some of the mini heads more aggressively, along with looking at these romaines. So I think we'll do our final year of study this year. But again, all that data is available on our website, along with a lot of really wonderful pictures. So if people are curious, check it out. It was a lot of fun. But you thought melon tasting was bad? 15 back-to-back slightly bolted lettuce varieties is actually considerably worse.
Yes. Yeah, one of the things we've worked on really heavily with Ray Tyler, who's one of our farmers that we've worked with in Tennessee, is lettuce. He's
Mm.
kind of known as a Southern salad king with that. He does year-round lettuce production, even in the heat of Tennessee. And so we've done some serious trials with him, with Johnny's and high mowing, and yeah, just to kind of see exactly what he can do down there.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so I'll have to get you some of the results from that as well, because I think you'd find that fascinating.
That would be really interesting. And it would be interesting to see if he's dealing with more of the disease issues down there with that humidity.
He is. And the kind of where it comes down to is he just has to outgrow everything. So his fertilization rates are very interesting, very high, because he needs to be able to mechanically to assimilate all that nutrient in such a fast time for those lettuces so they can grow fast enough.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's remarkable.
It's very fascinating looking at all the different areas of the country and how growing is so different in each area.
Yeah. Oh, it's amazing.
Yeah, because what he's doing is he'll cover his ledges with shade during the summer for a couple weeks. And then he's irrigating multiple times a day to keep them cool enough as well.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so he'll put drip on a couple times a day as well as overhead. And the goal is to try to cool the soil as well as cool the heads of lettuce while they're trying to, because, you get a heat index of 127 degrees. And it's incredibly hard to grow in.
Oh, my gosh. That reminds me, one of the other trials that we're doing this year is actually on vegetable amaranth as an alternative green for heat.
Oh.
Yeah. So we're actually working with the seed in the Hudson Valley to look at vegetable amaranth. And of course, the first question that farmers ask, because amaranth is pigweed, how close are those little guys going to get to flowering? And the answer is not close.
Yes.
Looking for anything that can deal with those high temperatures in the middle of summer and still deliver greens to the farmer's market every month or every week is certainly something that we're all thinking about without having to basically develop a field-based swamp cooler. Wow, that is intense.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So let's move into a little bit about some of the other work. Food safety, I know, is something that's huge right now. What are you seeing some practical steps that small farms are taking? Because, a lot of farms don't fall under all the requirements, but I think it's still very important that they think about this and actually, implement some stuff.
It is. It's so important. And I think the most important step that every farmer can take is to view this as something that's going to affect you. If you just feel like, oh, I'm going to be under the exemption, so I don't have to worry about any of this, I don't think that that's going to benefit anyone in the long term. Because even to be under the qualified exemption, you do still have to do a certain amount of paperwork. And I have to say that one of the nice things about going through all of this work is that you do learn some pretty common sense ways to keep people safe. Because we can complain about the regulation aspects of this, and we can certainly look at the fact that there's some pressure from industry that isn't good for small farmers and all of this. We can acknowledge that. But the bottom line is we do want to keep our customers healthy. So a lot of the time when we're talking about this right now, before we know exactly what all the rules are going to look like, that's our focus is, how do you keep an immunocompromised person who comes to the farmer's market and wants to use your food to help them get through cancer treatment from getting sick? And that we're always asking folks, think about your most vulnerable aspect of the population and make sure that what you do is going to be good for them. And I think the simplest thing that I have found, which is so often overlooked, is put in a hand washing station.
Yeah.
It seems so obvious, and yet it's amazing how often it's lacking that you have soap and warm water available in the wash and pack area. And the first thing you do is wash your own hands. That's an easy thing to do. Another easy thing to do is to just organize yourself so that you're always moving from dirtiest to cleanest. You're invariably going to be bringing a lot of soil into the wash and pack area at some position. So how do you move that soil and any potential contaminant back out of your system as quickly as possible so that you're not recontaminating your produce constantly? So I love the work that Robert Haddad has been doing, and I think it's actually on the Cornell Vegetable Program website, looking at incredibly low-cost ways to meet the guidelines for food safety. And he's basically created a series of tables and totes that allow you to move through this process for a few $100s. I mean, we're not talking about a lot of money to be in compliance here. And basically that's one of his primary considerations is, how do you move the soil and contaminants away? And then how do you apply sterilizer at the right moments so that produce comes out and clean?
That's really interesting. I'll have to reach out to him because that's actually a project that I'm kind of focusing on currently right now, looking at some of the screen tables and, the root washing tables that people are using that are so frequently all wood. And how do you easily move into something that's a little bit more of a food safe surface?
Oh, yeah, definitely talk to Robert. And he's been working really closely with Chris Callahan, the ag engineer for UVM, who's just brilliant at coming up with simple, cost-effective solutions that meet some of these needs. I was just looking at, so you were asking about people to follow on Instagram. I would follow UVM Ag Extension. One of his posts in the last week was showing how to use a laundry basket that has holes drilled in it at the right points as a spinner.
Yes, I saw that.
Yeah, because, let's face it, we all love the washing machine spinner, but how do you clean?
Yes.
We've all cleaned our own washing machines at home, right? And that stuff that's in the little ring there, you don't want to
Yes. No, it's nasty. So that's the thing is it's so easy for growers to use it so fast, but the cleaning part becomes very challenging. Like Paul and Sandy are still using a wash machine with just the bags inside. And I've mentioned that to Paul, and it's, they do it. I'd say some of the best out there at having a wash pack that is food safe. So, but having that basket inside is just that whole nother level, which basically makes the basket level 1. Which is incredibly now easy to clean. So, and we do have a previous episode. I'm not exactly sure the number episode with Chris Callahan and the entire food safety team from Vermont. So if you want to go, if you want to go back and listen to that one, we dive into, I think for an hour on just, some of the really deep stuff on food safety and what they are recommending to kind of start to comply.
Yeah, that's really good to hear.
So new varieties, I know that's always something farmers are looking at. We talked a little about the lettuce. Are there any standouts in the carrots that you guys found?
Oh, well, it depends on what you're looking for. Fresh market bunching carrots, I really loved Goldfinger. I thought that was a great carrot. And Romance was also nice. We, as a storage carrot, nothing is beating the quality of bolero, which is interesting. But we do have concerns about alternaria resistance with bolero. So some farms have actually added envy into the rotation. And I have not seen the flavor of envy match bolero. So I'm not selling it as that. But yield-wise, it certainly does match it. And it has better alternaria resistance in our trials. But in general, my recommendation with carrots, but probably with most crops is, as a farmer, if you can afford to pick up a packet or two of something new. You hear me say envy, don't plant your field into envy. Pick up a packet of envy. And at the end of one of your rows, just slip in 250 of those and see for yourself if it performs well in your system, because there's so many moving parts on a farm. And, environment is such an important factor in the quality of these crops on a different farm. So don't take my word for it, regardless of how good the research is, because I didn't do it specifically on your farm, unless I did, in which case, exactly what I'm doing.
I remember the year that they always were throwing out there, we're going to drop bolero. And I forget what year that was, but we bought 1 million seeds. And that was, that was a little bit of I took a hit in the budget, but we put them in the freezer. And then just used it for the next couple of years. And eventually they said, we're really not dropping it. We're like, whew. But
because all the Michael Kilpatricks bought 1 million seeds. There's actually a lot to it.
I'm sure there was a number of, people like me that would have bought 1 million seeds. So let's talk a little bit about marketing too, because you've been in the Hudson Valley now, and you're seeing how the proliferation of the small farms and the proliferation of kind of like everyone else trying to get into this whole buy local movement. Where do you see the marketing heading, and what do you see working for small farms?
Well, certainly we are seeing a level of saturation. And that means that people are having to consider working into additional markets. So either you have to be the very best at what you do and hope that you outlast folks that enter the market and aren't the best at what they do, which is a strategy that some farms are using, or you have to start reaching out to additional people who aren't yet engaging in the standard markets, which are certainly farmers markets and CSAs. So we're seeing some fascinating things happening with CSA movement, which kind of brings it back to the original impulse of CSA not only being community supported agriculture, but also that the farm is supporting the community, which I think is really exciting. So we're seeing more CSAs that are looking to feed populations that haven't traditionally been served, either by delivering directly to people, working with social services in order to help folks use that produce effectively so that it actually does increase quality of life, working more with at-risk populations like hospitals and treatment centers, and interfacing with needy populations and populations of means so that the two can work together. So, for example, if you are able to afford to buy two CSA shares and one of those goes to somebody that can't afford a CSA share at a lower rate, that would be an example of that sort of relationship. So those sorts of systems are working, and I wouldn't call it a marketing channel. I would call it engaging with our eaters on a different level. Because it isn't just about marketing. It is about considering us all to be in this together and making those relationships. And that's a much harder thing to do.
Especially when farmers are so busy running their farms. Obviously, they probably really want to engage in their community, but that can be really challenging.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
it is intentional. It's very intentional, and it is a huge amount of work. And it's something that can take years to, quote unquote, pay off. Relationship building takes time and energy and intention, as you said.
Yeah. So what else would you be following right now? It's doing some really interesting things in the vegetable space.
Oh my gosh, I'm terrible at Instagram, Michael.
Okay.
I have to admit, I'm really, really bad at doing social media stuff. So I don't know who to tell you that you probably wouldn't already know. You're so much better at this stuff than I am too.
Well, Roxbury Farm is fabulous because they do vegetables at scale very, very well.
Absolutely. Yeah.
They've got some good drone stuff. They have a good team there, which is you're seeing it from a couple different points of view, which is awesome.
Yeah. I agree. Yeah. And for an integrated farm that's doing crops and livestock, it's also another great angle.
Yeah, but just farms that you saw on your trips, was there anything that stood out that you should this farm is doing some cool things?
All of them did in their own way, but whether or not they're doing social media is the question.
Yeah, so you can actually see what they're doing. Yeah,
exactly. We didn't talk about that. The one farm that we did visit, which is obviously a huge social media presence, was JBG in Austin, but I think everybody already knows about them. So, I wouldn't, that's the thing. I figure, farms like Roxbury and JBG are institutions that you would know about. I don't have any secret nuggets of wisdom.
Okay. All right. I'll keep searching. Eventually I'll find those hidden gems.
Hidden gem.
Yes. All right. So I saw a picture here somewhere about some elderberry flowers, I think.
Yeah. And that was an example of some of these alternative crops that we were seeing out there that were just fascinating. On the left is actually a picture of a breeding program looking at doing some interesting things with native corns in the US, because there's a lot of non-traditional corn use out there as food. Okay. But they also, at the same research farm, they had an elderberry program. So they were eating different elderberries.
Yes.
And, I don't know. In graduate school, we made an elderberry pie, and that was a really bad idea.
Yeah. So actually, elderberries, my wife makes elderberry syrup. We actually... right beyond the camera here in the other room, I've got 40 elderberry starts going.
Oh my.
That we will be using this. They will be planting at my in-laws this year. And we're actually hopefully going to have somebody on that actually talk about elderberries in detail.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, Terry, who's actually been he's been in the elderberry business a very long time. We've connected once. Our goal is to get him on the podcast. Hopefully that will happen. But yeah, I think it's something that's very interesting, and it's exploding in the U.S. right now with the health aspects of it. So it could be something, but again, it takes a couple years to get them really established. And obviously the processing aspects are really a big challenge too. But I know a lot of farms which are actually planting them, and they're great in the hedgerows, they're great in that kind of thing, and then just harvesting the berries. So
absolutely. And boy, I think anybody that can incorporate some woody perennial crops into the farm, they're just so multi-purpose. They serve so different ecological services on a farm. So I think it's great.
I think, in one aspect, we as farms tend to niche. And I think that can be incredibly important, because I think when you niche, you really can understand a crop and really do it really, really well. But the other problem when you niche down too much is you forget all the aspects, as you said earlier, of attracting those pollinators, of, really giving yourself the diversity in case, something does happen.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's always something to struggle with.
If you didn't have struggles, it wouldn't be farming, right?
Yes, absolutely. All right, Crystal, well, I really appreciate your time today. This is a fascinating conversation. I'm always interested in what the research side of this whole movement is doing. And it's people like you, which are kind of pushing those boundaries for us so frequently. And I really appreciate that you're out there and the work that you're doing.
Thanks, Michael. This was fun.
So there you have it, another episode in the books. So I'd love if you would hop on over to iTunes and leave us a rating and a review. Those mean everything to us. We love to hear what you're thinking. If you have a podcast guest that you can recommend, please